Welcome back, my friend, to the mysterious, perhaps disheartening conclusion of Martin's ghost. Before you dive into the abyss of mystery, you may wish to find your quiet, safe haven. That could be your favorite easy chair, or the most comforting pillows on your sofa, or even your soft protective sheets on your bed. As if anything could protect you from the malevolent presence of Martin's ghost. Perhaps he's really your personal haunting. Or it might be that this unscrupulous phantom haunts someone you hold dear. The decision to venture further into this chilling tale is entirely up to you. But can you really afford not to delve further into the mystery of Martin's ghost?
Part 6. The lot awaited him in near total darkness. The kitchen was located at the far corner of the building, a dumpster hunkered nearby, surrounded by a tall wooden fence. The fence blocked any light emanating from the kitchen that tried to reach the dark lot. There were no windows on this end of the restaurant to feed spare light in Martin's direction. The building sat, squat and black. Two grimy yellow lights on opposing sides of the parking lot were curtained in by the heavy rain. Each dirt-painted fixture cast a feeble glow that radiated little further than a small patch, dirt and gravel at its feet. Martin could barely discern a partial outline of the 350Z. He clicked the door unlock button on his key fob, and the car responded in kind with a welcoming flash of its parking lights. From what he could make out, his car was the only one in the back lot. He felt the wind and rain gaining energy. Taking a breath, he hurled himself across the lot, hunched like a football player ploughing into the scrum. The wind scraped at the lot and caused the rope on a nearby flagpole to slap and clang. Now running completely unprotected, the rain came at Martin in angular sheets, slashing sideways at his face and body. Globs of muddy rain splattered off his shoes as he ran, soaking into his clothing from the waist down. Thunder deafeningly crashed and rolled close by. Despite hitting land, the storm was still on a heavy boil. By the time he reached the car, he was soaking wet and his good mood was vanishing. He quickly piled his large frame into the car and was painfully reminded that the driver's seat was pulled fully forward for his much smaller wife. He was certain that he would find a bruise in the partial shape of a Nissan steering wheel across his chest in the morning. He tried to adjust the seat, but his groping search for the controls around the seat base was frustrating and fruitless. Looking down the side of the seat, his eyesight fared no better. While he had been preoccupied with unimpaling himself from the steering wheel, the dome light had faded, leaving him with only a dim yellow haze as it leaked in through the rain pouring down the car's windows. He stretched and twisted his right arm over his shoulder, enabling him to reach back and flick on the dome light. As he pulled his arm down from the light, he knocked Leah's precariously perched cell phone from the middle console into the front passenger side footwell. "Damn," he groused under his breath. With the cabin now again under the pale white dome's light, he searched and found the seat controls. After quickly moving the seat back, he stretched across the mid-console and picked up the phone, only to realize that his spare office card key had been with the phone when it fell to the floorboard. The sight of the key was like his ticket to ride. Instantly his mind raced back to the office. These new thoughts of work destroyed what little remained of his good mood. Why did Leah put that there? He grumbled to himself, now starting to think about the difficult opinion letter he still needed to finish by Monday morning, and placed the phone and the key inside the console. He fine-tuned the seat adjustment, clicked on the wipers, cranked up the engine, and gave it a gratuitous hard rev, as if that was going to help finish the opinion letter. "Oh, screw it! I'll leave the light on. Leah will need it anyway," he thought. Thinking the lot was clear for at least 30 or 40 feet, he started to back the car as he reached for the rearview mirror. The engine was still revving well above idle and thrust the car backward faster than was wise in a dark, wet parking lot. As he touched the mirror, his eyes locked on it in horror, and he slammed the brake pedal with full force. The wheels, trying to bite hard into the surface below, skid roughly on the slippery gravel. In the mirror, Martin saw a man sitting in the back seat. He was face forward, glaring back at Martin through the mirror. Martin instantly recognized him. The same slight build, the same overcoat, and the same Stetson-like hat. He could now see the man's face, although it again seemed partially obscured, perhaps by a watery smudge on the mirror or something. Panic instantly set in, as though no time had lapsed between their meeting in Martin's bathroom and now. Martin threw open the car door and almost wrenched his body into multiple pieces with the seatbelt. His chest and leg muscles heaved violently against the unyielding restraint, exacerbating his terror and the pain in his chest. He found the buckle and managed to lunge out of the car, back into the thrashing squall. Hitting the ground on a running skid, he whipped around to face the car and stared wide-eyed with panic into what appeared to be an empty back seat. The driver's side door hung open, the dome light still lit the cabin, and the door ajar chime seemed to mindlessly call attention to the surreal nature of the evening's events. Completely bewildered, scared witless, and at the same time angry as hellfire, he lunged again. This time he headed toward the rear passenger door. Martin's fists were balled tight, blood pounding, his muscles strained to lash out at something. His chest painfully heaved as it struggled to keep up with his body's oxygen demands, and sweat mixed thickly with the rain. Defiantly raising his slightly shaking right fist like a hammer, Martin again searched the back seat and rear floorboards with an ever-increasing sense of fright and rage. He hadn't decided, but he was pretty sure he would put his fist through the window if he saw the monster somewhere within. Then, if the thing inside didn't kill him first, he'd wring the fucking bastard's neck if he had one. But the bastard was gone. Just then, a train barreled through the adjacent field. Trains here went in and out of port and rarely came through at night. Martin was unaware how close the restaurant's back lot was to the tracks. To a very preoccupied Martin, the hard charging engine and grinding wheels came on extremely sudden and loud. The mechanized thunder hit him hard. In surprise and confusion, he reeled again. It was a short train that passed as quickly as it had come. Yet the trains blasting through had been another hard staccato note in Martin's nightmare. Receding, it seemed to Martin that the sound of that train had sucked away his very soul and disappeared with it into the night. Perhaps that menace was on the train right now, hunting for Martin's soul there. Martin bent down, feeling spent, and grabbed his knees, breathing deep. However, still on alert, he kept his head up and continued to search the parking lot as best he could for signs or sounds of movement. Breathe, he thought. Breathe! Rain washed down his face and continued to soak into his clothes. The wind gradually lost some of its earlier fury, as if consumed by the train as well. He forced a few more deep breaths and tried to calm the pounding in his head and chest. Martin, ignoring the weather, walked around the car, alternating his probing stare between the car's interior, the far sides of the parking lot where the impotent bulbs hung, and the blackened countryside that lay beyond. He could barely see anything other than the faintly illuminated cabin of the car. Gradually, the cool rain brought him back from his trance-like search. He continued to scan the area as best he could, but at this point he knew he'd see nothing. Then, a terrible thought hit him. What if he didn't leave? He could be here somewhere, invisible. How else can he do that? He paused. No, I'm losing my mind. I am losing my mind, he screamed inside. Suddenly, his body responded to the harsh adrenaline roller coaster he'd ridden the only way it knew how. Martin instinctively ran a few paces from the car and puked into the rain-soaked gravel. He stood up and slowly walked back toward the car, feeling much the worse for the wear. He couldn't help but search again, scanning the darkness and then peering into the car. True to his intuitions, the menacing specter did not show. As he arrived at the open car door, he carefully looked again, fists reclenching, empty. He sat down in the driver's seat and felt slightly better, as if somehow vomiting had partially purged him of whatever it was that was haunting him. Most of the interior was soaked, but he barely noticed it. He looked up into the rearview mirror and felt his body tense again. He saw only the top of an empty rear seat and the dark space that lay beyond through the rear window. He couldn't help but continue to be wary, but it was the logical part of him, the left brain, that was still on alert. He tentatively grabbed a water bottle from the back seat and rinsed his mouth with a few big swigs. He spat them out flatly into the lot. The water tasted sweet compared to the acrid stomach acid in his mouth. He took a couple drinks. Swallowing the cool water had a calming sense of reality to it. He sat back in the seat and, still watching the rearview mirror, concentrated on slow, steady breaths for a few minutes. Feeling that the immediate danger had passed, he managed to pull himself together well enough to get the car back in gear. As he pulled around to the front of the restaurant, the sight of the bright entryway and the thought of Leah waiting for him helped the surreal world of the ghostly menace slightly fade. Arriving at the restaurant entrance, he found it vacant. It was then that he realized he must look a sopping mess. He grabbed the light sweatshirt that Leah had left in her seat and patted his hair and wiped his face and arms as best he could. For a moment, he was glad she had gone back into the restaurant. It gave him a moment to compose himself and continue his rough wipe down. However, after a few minutes, frustration set in. He did not want to have to go in and find her, not in his state. "Oh, come on, Leah, don't play games now," he thought plaintively. He tapped the horn, but with a bit more vigor than he'd intended. Leah appeared at the door, waving at one of the fills inside as she came out. "Hold your horses there, Lone Ranger," she admonished him loudly from under the awning. "A girl's got to take care of business too, you know." She covered her face from the rain as best she could and hopped in. "What happened to you?" she chided. "Forget how to drive a stick?" Clearly the wine was still having a merry effect. "So let's go home and play cowgirl and Indian," she quipped with a wink and gave Martin's thigh a firm squeeze. It was Martin's soaking wet leg that first caused Leah to realize something was amiss. "What's with the soaking breeches? Did you go dancing in the rain without me?" she teased. Feeling more of his leg and untucked shirt, she looked at him more carefully now. "Oh, you're not wet. You're drenched, honey." She peered closely at Martin's face for the first time since she'd hopped in the car. From what she could tell, he had no color to his face. His hair and clothes were dripping, and his shirt was askew as if he'd been in a fight. "Oh my gosh, Martin," Buzzkill started to set in. "What happened? Are you all right? Did someone attack you?" No, he started. Nobody attacked me." He looked down as his mind raced for an excuse. "I think I had a little too much to drink. I ran out to the car because of the rain and all, and I felt a bit sick, and maybe the combination of crabs and wine earlier didn't mix well for me. I didn't want to get sick in the car, so I walked around a bit. The air helped, but I guess I got a little wetter than I thought. It's okay. I'm good now. I'm good." He was now repeating this phrase as much in self-affirmation as response. "Are you sure?" Leah pursued in surprise. "You don't look so good. You're just soaking." Leah wasn't really buying it. She knew Martin was not the type to get sick over a little wine, seafood, and a short jog in the rain, but the situation was just too odd to figure out. "Why don't we go back in and have a cup of coffee? We can dry you off and see how you feel." She felt his soaked shirt as she spoke. "Geez, Martin." She also wanted to get a better look at him in the light. However, Martin still had no intention of presenting himself in public, and did not want to extend this trip any longer than absolutely necessary. He didn't think that the thing would reappear again tonight, but on the other hand, how could he be sure? No, if that thing was coming back, he wanted to at least be at home when it did. The thought then struck him. What if the monster appears in the back seat again while I'm driving? How could I maintain if that bloody jack-in-the-box pops up when I'm on the freeway? I'd probably run the car off the road or into oncoming traffic. That fucking thing could kill us. What if that's what he wants? Still, Martin didn't want to return to the restaurant. "Hey, do you think you can drive?" he asked as casually as possible. He'd rather take his chances with a slightly looped Leah than risk wrecking the car himself or return to the restaurant. Leah didn't really have many qualms about driving with a bit of a buzz, and Martin knew it. She prided herself on her ability to maintain better than most, as long as she wasn't truly blitzed. Sharing a single bottle of wine over dinner was far from what she considered hammered. Nevertheless, she used the opportunity to take one more run at getting Martin inside. "You know I can drive, but if you don't feel well, are you sure you don't want to go in and have a cup of coffee or a glass of water? Maybe dry off a bit in the bathroom?" she pushed. "Nah, I really just want to get into bed," he said as nonchalantly as he could muster. "I'll be okay." He felt like this last line was becoming his mantra. "Well, okay, hun, if that's what my baby wants." She caressed his hair and gently kissed his cheek, but inside, Leah frustration was brewing. They switched places and Martin reclined in the passenger seat, shutting his eyes and trying to keep his mind blank. Deep down, he was still scared to death. "Oh shit, Martin!" Leah blurted as she slid into the driver's seat. "It's a swimming pool over here. What the hell happened?" Her frustration started surfacing together with her surprise. I forgot to shut the door when I went for my walk," he replied pathetically. It was the best he could do. He shut his eyes to feign sleep and ward off further cross-examination. Part 7. Thankfully, the drive home was uneventful. Leah kept quiet, thinking that Martin was trying to sleep. Martin tried to focus on the calm, fluffy white clouds he'd seen earlier that day, hovering in a sea blue sky. How wonderful it would be to float like that without any cares. No work, no partners jumping ship, no demanding clients, no fucking jack-in-the-box spook scaring the crap out of you for reasons unknown. Shit, he thought yet again. Who or what is this thing? What does it want? Why? He cried in his mind. Upon arriving home, Martin immediately adopted an "I don't feel so good, I'm really tired, must sleep" facade. He did not feel up to an interrogation and had made up his mind that he would never tell Leah about the reappearance of the ghostly invader. Wherever this led, he was going to have to fight this battle alone. Leah was still very perplexed. She continued to suspect that Martin was stressing under the weight of his job and career uncertainty. It would only be natural. He had taken on a significant amount of responsibility when he joined the firm, and the job was challenging. Clients, and occasionally partners, demanded results, sometimes overly optimistic results. He was talented, and she knew he could handle it, but lately he seemed to have a very hard time mentally breaking free from work. He not only brought work home, but he seemed to carry it around in his head all the time. The rumors surrounding the firm's instability certainly weren't helping and fueled more and more of his worries. Nevertheless, none of that fully explained his freaky behavior of late. Leah continued to puzzle. Even with the weather, how on earth did he get so messed up just running out to get the car? And what was with him earlier when I found him totally stressed this morning? She started to think that something else must account for his recent behavior, but she couldn't fathom what. What is he hiding? Her brain started checking off the list. Drugs? No, not Martin. Besides, nothing else points to drugs, and I don't think he could hide that from me. Has he done something wrong or gotten involved with the wrong sorts of people? What could that possibly be? Martin is so straight-laced. It's just not him. She resolved to gently probe more when he was feeling better, but the resolution just didn't satisfy. Honey, did you see my round brush in the bathroom tonight? She gently asked an apparently half-asleep Martin. She knew it was still sitting in the bottom of the day bag. "Nah," came Martin's sleepy reply. His response was an affectation. Sleep was still somewhere off in a more peaceful distance, somewhere where ghostly apparitions did not dwell. "Sorry," whispered Leah in a planned response. "I must have dropped it in the trunk. I'll be back in a minute, hun. You sleep well," she attempted to comfort him. Neither fully understood, but they had just had one of their first fully choreographed conversations since they were married, each fulfilling their own separate calculated goal. The unearthly visitor was affecting both of them now on a full-time basis. Leah hurried to the garage. Though she had flicked on the light, she also grabbed a flashlight from the shelf. She didn't want to miss anything, and she knew she would have to be quick to avoid arousing suspicion. She started with the trunk. Since Martin wasn't feeling well, she had been the one to unload it earlier, but with Martin nearby, she only had time to quickly remove the day bag, cooler, and beach blanket. She now removed a few smaller items and carefully searched the inside of the trunk with the flashlight. She swung the light slowly in a left-to-right, back-to-front sweep, looking for anything unusual. She even lifted the carpet and searched around the spare tire. However, judging by the dust, it did not look as though the compartment had been disturbed in a long time. She next moved to the driver's compartment. Aside from being drenched and much muddier than she expected, she found nothing unusual. She repeated her search throughout the car, but other than finding her phone and Martin's card key, she came up empty. She wasn't sure whether she should feel relieved or more concerned. She settled on the latter. The Gordian knot remained. She returned the flashlight to the shelf and plodded upstairs. Martin appeared to be sleeping or trying to sleep. She quietly completed her bedtime routine and turned in. After adjusting her pillow, she rubbed his back gently. He rolled over in a fetal position and hugged her tight. It was odd for him not to lay face up with his body stretched out and draw her to him. But Leah couldn't bring herself to say anything more than a gentle, "I love you, Martin. I love you, Leah. Forever." The word forever carried an ominous tone in his voice, but Leah couldn't put her finger on it. It rested unevenly in her mind. It was not a typical Martin phrase, but that was as close as she got to pinpointing the disquiet she felt with his words. Martin spent the night of the fitful. The ticking of the clock next to his bed relentlessly reminded him how slow time could pass. It was as though, with each tick, The clock was visiting upon him death by 1,000 thin, crisp cuts. In cadence with the clock's tormenting beat, his mind continued to flash through recollections of each meeting with the damnable ghost. Even work could no longer gain a foothold in his thoughts. He tossed and turned as if he could leave these malicious memories behind him with one quick turn or another. By morning, he was exhausted. Sunday was their day to sleep in. Between Martin's ominous use of the word forever and his flipping about all night, Leah had not slept well either. Lying sleepily in bed and gazing at the warm, cozy room that had become their nest, she pondered how Martin had changed. Since they'd first moved into the house, they spent many quiet Sunday mornings reveling in the peace and warmth of their bedroom and each other. But the past several months, it had become harder and harder to enjoy these moments. Leah didn't want to point fingers, but Martin was the problem. More specifically, she thought Martin's new job and his difficulty in managing the stress that came from it rained too often on their sunny weekend mornings. It seemed that lately, particularly since the night he freaked out over the guy he thought he saw in his birthday photo, that his distraction and worry had intensified. She considered lighting into Martin with the exhaustion and frustration that had been building inside her. However, the thought struck her, "You catch more flies with sugar than vinegar," and she decided to try to start the day on a positive note rather than a rousting argument. Perhaps then she could get Martin to loosen up and talk more. She headed down to the kitchen to make breakfast, which she planned to bring to him in bed. Breakfast in bed was their standard routine for birthdays, and they'd previously talked about extending the tradition to Mother's Day and Father's Day after they had a child. She could tell him that she was practicing for a future Father's Day. That would bring up thoughts of a future life and a son or daughter. Leah thought this might spur Martin to tell her more about what was going on now, particularly if it could have any future impact on their family. Martin was still pretending to be asleep. Actually, he was wrapped in combat with his demons and losing. He could now clearly imagine, or he thought perhaps he'd really seen, the details of the phantom's face in the rearview mirror the night before. The short, dark hair, partially obscured by his hat, looked trim, as though recently cut. His eyes were small, dark, and sharp. The pupils were unnaturally dilated, almost to the point of swallowing the sclera. They gave his eyes and face a lifeless appearance and suggested a violence greater than the invader's physical stature. His nose was sharp but correctly proportioned for the face. The mouth was small and lips thin. His chin was not bold or chiseled, but it had a sharp, well-defined cut. His skin was tan and healthy, in direct contradiction to the lifeless look to his shark-like eyes. The contrast only added to his menace. Martin tossed about and broke into a sweat. Feeling the futility of lying in bed, he forced himself to sit up and looked around the room as if expecting the devil to jump out at him. He heard Leah hard at work in the kitchen, but the thought of breakfast did not break his concentration on the room around him. Except for the distant kitchen noises rising from below and his tense breathing, the room was silent. The armchair across from the bed sat vacant. The bedroom window was closed and locked. Leah had partially opened the horizontal blinds so that bright sunshine softly filtered into the room. The daylight gave a gentle glow to the beach sunrise print that hung kitty-corner to the window. Martin and Leah had placed it there specifically for this effect. The bedroom door was closed but slightly ajar. Sitting now in the peaceful warmth of their bedroom, the contrast between the sweet serenity of the room and his escalating fear served only to bring the surreal closer to his own sense of reality. Could he be here? Thought Martin. Is he still stalking me? Right now, I can't take this anymore, he screamed in his mind. He slowly arose from the bed, senses on high alert. He first directed his attention toward the mirrors and photos in the room. Glancing about, he did not notice anything unusual, no obvious sign of the malignant haunt. He walked toward the cherry dresser that stood in front of the bed for a closer inspection. 3 cherry-framed photos stood on a tasseled green runner that split the top of the piece into 2 well-polished strips of cherry. Above it hung a round mirror in a thick, dark cherry frame. The photograph to the left showed Martin and Leah together with his parents. The foursome stood gleefully around the folks' family Christmas tree 2 years earlier. The photo to the right held Leah's parents, clearly having the time of their lives on their 30th anniversary in Hawaii. The one in the center showed Martin and Leah in passionate embrace, At the moment they'd been pronounced man and wife. The specter, however, had not intruded on any of these blessed occasions. The mirror above similarly reflected only the usual, giving no signs of the demon. Martin's head swiveled slowly toward the bathroom, but in doing so, the summer beach scene in the framed print hanging near the window caught his eye. Could he appear in a painting too? Martin puzzled. Why not? The bastard seems capable of anything. Beads of perspiration condensed on his forehead, and his body tensed as he approached the framed scenery. The print depicted a warm Atlantic beach, Florida perhaps, in quiet summer morning repose. A large, radiant sun was coming up on the horizon, scattering shimmers of light here and there off the waves. A couple of gulls drifted lazily in the light blue sky. It was no better than three-star commercial art to the trained eye, but they'd found it on their honeymoon and hadn't parted with it since. Martin surveyed the print, and finding nothing, he chastised himself. Well, what am I expecting this thing to show up sunning himself on the bloody beach? Then something struck him as odd. What the hell? He puzzled under his breath. There was still no sign of the spirit in the painting, but as Martin readjusted his focus from the beach scene to the glass covering it, his heart raced and his head started to swirl. Ever so faintly, a pattern became visible in the light dust on the glass. It had been imperceptible at a distance, but up close he distinctly saw something. Leaning his head just off-center, the reflection of light at this angle clearly revealed the pattern. Someone had scrawled a message in the lower right-hand corner of the glass. He felt as though a cold, hard hand was firmly squeezing his heart as the words sunk deep inside. The missive was unmistakable. It was simple and terrifying. It read, "Fear me." As he read the words, he seemed to hear a hissing voice in his head repeating the phrase. Martin spun to face the room, searching frantically with his gaze. Nothing stirred. "Where are you?" he demanded in hushed but vehement tones. "What do you want from me? What the hell do you want?" As he spat the words, he was trying to ignore the fact that his body was failing him. His legs had gone weak and his skin had become cold and clammy. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his strength dissipating as he felt as though his body was shutting down. Then he heard it. "Coom," drawled a low, raspy, disembodied voice. The sound came from the area around the dresser at which he'd stood just moments ago. He stared at the empty space in disbelief. It felt as if the air was leaving the room. "Coom," urged the voice again. Then the thought struck him like a fist. The mirror! He struggled to move toward the mirror, as if drawn into a trance. He wanted to look away from it. He wanted to run as fast and as far as he could, but he was unable. Although only he was moving, it seemed as though the mirror now glided toward him. Closer now, he saw a blurred image in the mirror. It was like a bad hologram that showed poorly unless you stood directly in front of it. Still, he knew what it was. The surreal and the real were violently colliding again, and Martin was caught in the middle of the horrendous turbulence. When he stood centered at the foot of the dresser, Martin faced forward and stared directly into the face of the specter. The lifeless black eyes bored directly into him as if trying to psychically smash his soul. The menacing visage appeared exactly as Martin had seen in his mind. Martin nearly collapsed before the fiendish vision. Not only had the demon manifested himself just as Martin had imagined, but to Martin's horror, he stood neither behind nor to the side of Martin in the mirror. He stood exactly where Martin stood in the room. Martin's own reflection was disturbingly absent in the looking glass. It was as though he was peering through a window at a parallel universe. It was a universe in which this thing had taken his place. As he gazed in horror, it occurred to him that nothing in his peripheral vision had changed in his room. Unable to comprehend, he was petrified. Having brought Martin to the foot of the mirror, the man now appeared to be taking stock of him, surveying him like a stuck pig at the butcher's that smells a bit off. The condescending manner of the apparition sparked Martin's anger. "Who are you?" Martin's voice strained as he struggled with one impulse to flee and another to flail at the mirror with his fist. "Who am I? That's a strange question coming from you," sneered the man in the mirror. The voice was steady but sharp like his face. His facial expression did not change. The querulous answer further piqued Martin. His adrenaline started to flow. "What the hell do you mean? What do you want?" Martin tried to reassert some measure of control on the situation. He was still conscious of Leah downstairs and desperately wanted to keep her away from this devilish thing. He lowered his voice but spoke with as much force as he could muster. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Oomph," grunted the man. "You don't get it. I'm your creation, your child, your masterpiece," he sniped. Each emphasized word lashed out at Martin. "Enough riddles, damn it! Who are you? What do you want?" Martin was struggling again to maintain. Poor Martin, worried Martin, stressed Martin. The apparition's mocking tones were insidious. "Of course you don't understand." He paused, as if enjoying Martin's pain with each denouncement. The specter was gaining strength and venom. You fretted and fussed, worried and whined. You tossed and turned at night, and you spun like a wobbly top all day. You nursed your fears and insecurities like a precious child. Now you're dumbfounded to see they're all grown up and staring you in the face. As the man spoke, Martin felt him taking on an actual physical presence around him. Martin's vision started to blur at the edges, and he found it difficult to remain upright. "You haven't been living for months, think about it. You buried yourself in the stress of your work, keeping yourself locked up in a cloud of problems. Most of the things you fretted about never even happened. They were your coveted worries, your precious anxieties. You had a loving wife, a well-paying job, a nice house, good friends and family that loved you, yet you couldn't see it anymore." He paused again, enjoying the pained expression on Martin's face as he dug in. "The time and patience you lavished on your worries and insecurities created me. Then I followed you. No, I hunted you. Your fretting was pathetic, but it sustained me, and when I snared you from inside that photograph, that was a thunderbolt of pure power. After that, well, the more you panicked, the stronger I became. I learned to play you like a harp. Your clock has been ticking, Martin, and time has run out. Like I said, you'll hardly miss what you had since you gave up on it some time ago. Now I'll take what you have freely given." The space surrounding Martin was rapidly devolving into the surreal world of the stranger. It was insane. He was being overwhelmed, subdued by a demon that had been haunting him from mirrors and altered memories. "This can't happen!" Martin screamed inside. The man spoke more matter-of-factly now. "You forgot a fundamental rule, boy. Everyone walks a tightrope in life, but when you walk a tightrope, you must never look down." And you looked. As the man in the mirror finished his diatribe, Martin realized that he was now looking out across his own bedroom from the vantage point of the dresser mirror. In front of the mirror, he saw himself, but the Martin on the other side of the mirror moved of his own accord and headed toward the door. Martin thrashed about, trying to get a foothold in the room. His room. The warm, sunny cocoon he'd shared with his beautiful wife. His limbs met no resistance, but they gained no ground. He hysterically wailed at the receding figure with all his strength. "You bastard, come back!" However, his voice trailed off into the void around him. It was a nothingness, a place of limbo in which he could do no more than look across the beautiful empty room that used to be his. And while he gazed out, he began to sob, and the room began spinning around him as he felt his consciousness take flight. Moments later, Martin's alarm clock rang, and yet... Afterward, the next time you've got too much on your plate and stress and worry hound you day and night, just remember, the rule when walking a tightrope is don't look down. If you do, Martin may be waiting for you. Author's note: this is a purely fictional work. Any similarities to any persons, places, or events are wholly coincidental. By way of example, this story is not autobiographical. It can't be. I haven't seen that bloody menace in at least a month. No animal testing was used in the creation of this story, although I did try out a few lines on my cat. He seemed to like it, although he did take the opportunity to drone on about the Freudian implications in my choice of vehicles and the odd juxtapositioning of the hairdryer with a naked man. I told him I just liked the damn car and suggested he get over himself. He's been pouting behind the couch since, but purely of his own fricking Freudian volition. He eats the same bloody kibble every day without complaint, but you tell him just once that Freud was a kook and he gets his whiskers in a tangle. Cats. I hope you've enjoyed this production of Martin's Ghost, copyright of the written work 2010 William Mellon, audio-visual work, copyright 2024 William Mellon. Some have said that a second listen actually revealed a lot more. I'll leave that up to you, but I'm very thankful to have you as a listener. If you've enjoyed the story and/or found it helpful, please tell your friends, forward a link